Good evening. We're going to sing a few songs together. They go back quite a ways, a little bit nostalgic, but we look forward to you joining with us. And we'll just take it from here. First song, please.
Everybody sing praises to the Lord. Everybody sing praises to the Lord. I once was lost, now I'm found. Since I'm gone, I'm heaven bound. Everybody sing praises to the Lord. Everybody sing praises to the Lord. Everybody sing praises to the Lord. I once was lost, now I'm found. Sins are gone, I'm heaven bound. Everybody sing praises to the Lord. What a wonderful change in my life has been wrought since Jesus came into my heart. I have light in my soul for which long I have sought since Jesus came into my heart. Everybody sing praises to the Lord. Everybody sing praises to the Lord. I once was lost, now I'm found. Sins are gone, I'm heaven bound. Everybody sing praises to the Lord. Standing on the promises of Christ my King, through eternal ages let his praises ring. Glory in the highest I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. Everybody sing praises to the Lord. I once was lost, now I'm found. Sins are gone, I'm heaven bound. Everybody sing praises to the Lord. Sing praises to the Lord.
Thank you. You sound good. Keep it up. A quiet place. Everybody knows this one.
There is a quiet place, far from the rapid pace, where God can soothe my troubled mind. Sheltered by tree and flower, there in my quiet heart with Him, my cares are left behind. Whether a garden small or on a mountain tall, new strength and courage there I find. Then from this quiet place I go prepared to face a new day with love for all mankind.
We could all use a little more of that love for all mankind. In a divided world, we've come together to praise God, to remember, and to bless this space and this place. Our accompanist is Margie Moran. Many of you remember her. Margie, thank you.
We are one in the Spirit, we are one in the Lord. We are one in the Spirit, we are one in the And they'll know we are Christians by our love, by our love. Yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. We will work with each other. We will work side by side. We will work with each other. We will work side by side. And we'll guard each one's dignity and save each one's pride. And they'll know we are Christians by our love, by our love. Yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love. Yes, they'll know we are Christians when all things come, and all praise to Christ Jesus, His only Son, and all praise to the Spirit who makes us one. And they'll know we are Christians by our love, by our love. Yes, they'll know we are Christians by our love.
Thank you. I think we have one more this evening, and then we'll let the program keep on moving forward. This is what used to be known as the what?
This used to be the Good News Singers in the 70s. We actually have not sung together for 50 years.
Anybody remember Merlin Reeves?
It was actually Merlin Reeves and John Moy.
Yep, who put that together. I'm kind of an interloper, as I think Doug is also, because this ended when Mr. Reeves left after our 7th grade year, and it was an 8 to 10 grade organization. So we just missed it, but here we are filling in. So glad to be with you. Okay, we're doing. I was right. We do have one more. It's at the end, so we'll say goodbye.
Wasn't it awesome to sing praises with them? Say amen. We're so glad that they've come to join us and be back home. Isn't it nice to come back home? Reunions are awesome in this way, in that we get to spend time together, not only getting reacquainted, but also being able to praise God for how He's brought us to this place and to this time. And there have been steps and steps. And if you want to know, my name is Pastor Jim, and I'm the newbie on the block, just here since April. And we're so already been embraced by the community and feel like it's home and family, and we're thrilled with that. So it's nice to find our extended family and get acquainted with them and have this opportunity this week to recognize how God has led. I hope that you looked at your bulletin if you noticed that each of the services are outlined there. Tonight we're going to be focusing on Motherlode Adventist Junior Academy, and then tomorrow morning at 9:30, Adventist Health and Medical Community, and then for the 11 o'clock, Discover Life. And then you'll find that we have services also. The memorial service is going to be tomorrow at 4 o'clock for John Moy. And then we pick up with an evening program that we'll be advertising as well. So that's just kind of an outline of the weekend and the opportunities we have together. This is a special time for us to praise God, to recognize that, yes, it's wonderful that we can regather, but it's been God's blessing that's brought us here. Can you say amen? I've asked Melody if she would come and share with us a roll call. Melody, where are you at right now? What connects you to our community and to the school?
Well, I'm the 7th and 8th grade teacher, and also I teach music.
And she does an awesome job. If you haven't heard the students, they're thrilled to have her. We're so thankful that you're here. Could you just share with us a roll call?
All right. Well, you know, the first thing a teacher has to do in the morning is what? Take attendance, right? Okay, so let's see. Do we have any former principals out there? If you are a former principal of MLAJA, please stand up. Yep, there's Rod. Let's give him a hand. Good. And Andrew, thank you. Okay. All right, now we have a lot of teachers in the audience, former teachers and former staff members. And I would like, if you're a former teacher or a former staff member, please stand up. All right, and we have a lot of former students. If you are a former or a current student, would you please stand up? All right. Well, that completes the calling of the roll. And here is Pastor Tyson.
Thank you, Melody. Good evening, everybody. I noticed something. All the students shot up, and all the teachers who were like, do I really want to put myself out there? It just actually shows the heart of teachers. My mom's a teacher. My sister's a teacher. My dad was a teacher, all in our Adventist schools. And I know our teachers don't do it for recognition, for glory. They do it because they love kids, and they want to see kids in the kingdom. I should probably introduce myself. I am the new kid on the block, Pastor Jim. He said he's a new kid. I've only been here about 3 weeks or so. I'm the new youth pastor, associate pastor for youth, however we want to say that, and discipleship. I don't know how we're going to throw that all together, but it's been my task tonight, because apparently pastors are the only ones that can pray, to open up our program with prayer tonight. Let's bow our heads. Father God, we thank you for drawing us from far and wide to come here for this special weekend. And I pray that as we go throughout this evening's service and throughout the rest of the Sabbath, tomorrow with all the many things that are going on, all the moving parts, that it would all go smoothly. It would be a time of joy, a time of remembrance, and a time of visioning for the future and imagining and dreaming what you will continue to do through this church, through this school, and through this community of like-minded believers. Thank you for being with us here tonight. We ask your Spirit's presence. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
So if I am following two pastors who are new kids on the block, I guess I'm the older kid on the block, the former kid on the block, since I taught here for a few years. My name is Lance Carl, and I retired. So I said I retired, and you clapped. I'm not quite sure what to make of that, but so I'm kind of wishing I'd actually made some preparations for tonight, since there's a pretty good turnout here. But being a teacher, I plan to talk until the bell rings, so it's not going to be a problem. I have a few slides that we put together. Janet Johnson, some years ago, 2010 or so, did a history of the school, and she interviewed people, she found archives, she found pictures, and I'll apologize now for some of the pictures. They are not good quality, but that's what we have. So Janet spent hours and hours putting together a written history that would help us understand a little bit about MLAJA, where it started. So she was the secretary from 94 until 2011, at which point she retired. And so she is really responsible for much of what I know about the early times and even a lot of the times when I was here. Seems like when you retire, it's easy to let things slip right away. So about 1960, And the school actually started in 1952 with Miss Hazel Striplin, and she had 3 students. And at that time and for several years, they taught in a house and then in the basement of the Hope Street Church that used to be our former Adventist church. And then several people began to arrive in the early 50s, and I know I'm going to leave out some really important names, and I apologize in advance. I only could work off of what Janet had left us. So the Boyces came in 1950, and they had, I believe, 3 children. The Anspachs arrived about the same time, maybe a little bit later. They also had 3 children. And they decided that at some point they were interested in a seriously organized Adventist elementary school. And so the Howards also arrived in 1956, the Graybos, the Wagners, and the physicians in this group started Sonora Community Hospital in 1957. So 2 classrooms in the bottom of the Hope Street church, and they had, in 1963, they had 33 students that filled up those Sabbath school classrooms. And so they began to look for a place to build another school. And so 1960, they had 14 students, in 63, 64, there's 33, and they're pushing for space. And they found this space where the current school is located. And in 1964, they put up the center 2 classrooms. And it's kind of interesting, the nice stone facade on the front was constructed with a stonemason, and a lot of students and parents gathered rocks from Peppermint Creek, which I believe is down in the Jamestown area. They built it, they finished the 2 classrooms. The first big rain destroyed the foundation for the rock facade, and it crumbled to the ground. Turns out they had built in the summer, the ground was hard, they dug down, they did their footings, they did everything right, but not quite right enough. So they rebuilt that, and that worked out fine. So from 2 classrooms in the church, they had 2 classrooms here. They're running 8 grades. And by 1965, 66, they had 51 students. And so it's beginning to grow quite a bit. So when they found this area, it had been a horse pasture, and they purchased it. Sonora Community Hospital was over there. This structure did not exist. And that whole area was overgrown with vines, wild berry vines. It was rutted. It was a dirt road to get there, very rocky, very rough. And when it rained, the water flowed across the field diagonally to this part of the, behind where the parking lot is. But they put the building up, and then sometime later they worked on the ball field, and they dug a big trench and put in a big culvert. And I see some people nodding their heads who must have been here and must have seen part of that take place. They covered it over, and it's sort of level. It's not very level, the field, but it's definitely better than it was when they purchased it. So that was a big deal. It seems like before the school had a bus, when they did field trips, they would lean on parents, and it wasn't uncommon for a parent to put 12 students in a car and take them on a field trip. I think we would be hard-pressed to get away with that today, fortunately. The ski program started in 1964. So MLAJA, every year there's been snow, has taken up to 10 days a year to go skiing up at Dodge Ridge. At one point, I believe it was $2 or $3 a student. The first documentation I have is $8 a student. I'm not sure what it is currently, $50, $60 maybe. Dodge Ridge was extremely good to MLAJA. And they allowed us to go up there. They provided, at least when I was here, lessons and ski rentals. But the price has grown steadily, and I don't know how long that'll continue, but it's really a great program. I came here not knowing how to ski. John Moy taught me in between teaching students, and I found it was most interesting to watch a student who was uncoordinated, maybe hardly had strength to get up off the snow for the first several weeks, and by the end of the season, they were skiing, up to intermediate runs. And to watch that development out of the classroom really, really was most interesting. Apparently, in about 1966, after they fixed up the new field, at some point in that time, we had a student who lived that direction, I think, and above the campus. I'm not really sure who this student was. Janet didn't mention it, but I could make an educated guess. And at lunchtime, they would go home for lunch. They would open their windows, and they would play the latest music. So all the kids could hear the current hits, so to speak. I don't know what the teachers thought about that, but there's only so much you can do, and that's okay. 1965, they added the third classroom, which is the one on this east end, and it became the 9th and 10th grade room. So they had 1 to 4, 5 to 8, and then 9 and 10. And so for several years, it was a 3-classroom school. Leon Stickney, I met him several times. I did not know him. He was before my time. But when he arrived, he loved this area. I believe he came up from Modesto, and I think he had, 5 kids. So his comment to Janet, or at least in the notes Janet left, was he thought maybe they hired him because he had 5 kids, and that was going to certainly help the school. So the school continues to expand. There's still 3 rooms, but they then divided up into 4 classrooms. So there's 1st to 3rd, there's 4th to 6th, there's 7 and 8, which actually met in the kitchen. So you remember. So I was on campus yesterday, and Terry reminded me that before they remodeled, the kitchen was about half the size it is now, and it's not very big now. They had 9 7th and 8th graders, and the story is the teacher loved to eat sandwiches with lots of onions. And that room has no ventilation. It's got 1 small window, and I'm just thinking, yes, I'm glad I wasn't here at that point. 1970, John Moy arrived. And so I see I've mentioned some of those things. So John arrives, and they split it then to allow him to teach 4th, 5th, and 6th. If you're a teacher, 4, 5, 6 is not a good split. 1, 2, 3 is not a good split. It naturally falls 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. But they did that, and it worked out. When they first established the school, they called it Motherlode Academy. And that was great until they discovered 50 miles away another Motherlode Academy. So they added the word Adventist to it. So then it was Motherlode Adventist Academy. And then at some point, they added the word junior, Motherlode Junior Academy. And then at some point, the conference decided schools should have the word Adventist. So it became Motherlode Adventist Junior Academy. I hate to think how many times I tried to explain to people the name of that school. I made a lot of phone calls to make arrangements for field trips, and I would give the name of the school, and it was always, what? And then I would try to explain what Motherlode meant, what junior meant, what Adventist meant, and sometimes even what academy meant. I lobbied the entire time I was here for a name change, but my name of choice was not very creative. It was going to be Sonora Adventist School, short, to the point, said where we were, who we were, and what we were, but the initials didn't work out so well. Where do you go to school? SAS. So fortunately, the board was wise enough to ignore my wishes. 1975, we had 11 eighth grade graduates, including Alan Pratt, who is sitting right there, and Jim Grabo. And so those are the two that Janet mentioned that are here. Is there anybody else that I'm overlooking in this era that's here? I know I'm going to leave out people, and I apologize. Leon, during his time, they began to think about expanding the church, and so they started to build this facility. I believe this would be 1969. And at that time, they put on the fourth classroom, which is the one on the west end, which is now the first and second grade room, but they didn't finish it for several years. And so it was the play area for the school in bad weather. And once they finished it and moved first and second grade in there, then they lost that. Then they were back to playing in the hallway. So we got that finished. John's here, he's teaching fourth to sixth. Yeah, and then in about that same year, Rod Curbs with 5 graduates. Rod, what year did you finish 8th grade? Do you know? 71? Okay. So that's at least 3 that live currently here or have been living currently here. I'm sorry. I say I don't have that information, so that's why you're here to tell me. What year?
So I graduated, we were the first 8th grade class to graduate in here in 1970.
1970. Okay.
Church and my sister, and we actually have Eileen Howard and Jeanette Boyce here. So
Well, good. So there's more. See, I knew that I was going to get myself in trouble. If I mention any names, I'm going to leave somebody out, and I apologize for that. So on we go. Roy Ingham is the next principal that was here from 76 to 83. He was the principal when I arrived. The school was in pretty good shape because it was not that old. The church was in good shape because it was virtually brand new. But they're already talking about wanting some gymnasium and some more space and some more classroom. So towards the end of Roy's time here, they did indeed begin construction, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. So the conference is pushing us, if we want to stay junior academy, we have to expand the classes we can teach. That means more teachers. And so they began thinking about that. Plus, band would love to have had a place to have practices. I'm not sure where they did band before the gym in a classroom. Probably the one on the far right, because that's the biggest. Yeah. So anyway, so it expands. The first yearbook was done in 1976, 77, called The Load. And it was hit or miss for several years. It seems that as they're thinking about where to build a gymnasium, they kind of are thinking about where that current place is. The property belonged to Dr. Wagner, and I guess nobody had talked to him about this, and so he started to do some work on that land, and the church got all worked up and decided they needed to make some arrangements. So they ended up buying that property. And then they had it designed to fit a very small, narrow gymnasium in that space. Quite a project. We actually had an associate pastor here, Paul Mathis, who it's like God brought him here to supervise the construction. And he spent most of his time running around working with the city and or the county to get permits and get things worked out, and the fire department. Water was a problem for fire safety and so on. Skiing, we're now up to 10 times, $8 per week. And they decided that maybe selling Texas Manor fruitcakes would be a good way to raise money. And I know some of you are groaning because you had to buy them. Some of you are groaning because you had to eat them. But it was a way for students, if they hustled, to earn the income to allow them to ski. I don't mind the fruitcakes, but I never could afford to buy one. So, you know, there's all kinds on this spectrum. At one point, they had quite a bit of cash. It's Friday afternoon. They aren't going to make it to the bank to deposit it before sundown, and so Roy Ingham and Nadine had begun as a part-time secretary. Roy said, I'll take it home and I'll hide it, and then Monday we'll bring it back and deposit it. He takes it home. He hides it under his bed, which, you know, that's a good place to hide it, except it was a waterbed. And when he went to pull it out, the waterbed had sprung a leak, and he had cash all over his house trying to dry it out in order to begin to make a deposit. So I guess there must be a lesson there. I'm not quite sure what it is. You can draw your own conclusions. When I came here in 1979, I had been teaching in Southern California, and dress slacks, dress shirt, necktie, that's how we rolled down in Southern California. I came up here, and I'm like the only one. It's kind of like when I wear a mask today in Tuolumne County, I'm like the only one. And so Roy gave me no end of grief. Pleasantly. I mean, he wasn't mad about it, and he didn't give me too hard a time, but it's like, you know, relax, et cetera, et cetera. So it took me a year or two to give up the tie and become a little bit more casual. Well, times change. The last few years, if I didn't feel like wearing slacks and a nicer shirt, then I would put on a sport coat and a dressy shirt and wear my jeans, because jeans, that didn't fly for faculty most of the time. But invariably, somebody would say, hey, why are you all dressed up? So I got away with jeans, became very casual, and that worked out fine. When I started here, the kids were not allowed to wear shorts, and I think no jeans. Do you guys, students, do you remember that? No jeans. And parents used to complain because kids are tough on pants, and jeans hold up better than, you know, a lot of other things. So, you know, times change. All right, so there is a picture of the staff at one point, and John is on the bottom right, and Roy Ingham is in the blue shirt with the sunglasses, and the others you'll have to guess at. So they are finishing up the gymnasium. Unfortunately, Roy doesn't stay long enough to see it in use, and they had decided the principal was going to have the classroom at the far end. It's now the 5th and 6th grade room, but for quite a while it was the 7th and 8th grade room. So they put a big window in there so the principal could go in and deal with business or answer the phone and watch the kids. Well, the principal never used that classroom, so it seemed kind of awkward to have a big window in there, so they actually covered it up, and on the other side, the classroom side, they put in a big bookcase. So there's the time that was used when Roy was here and before the gymnasium. Church had potlucks. They used the kitchen, one home stove, 4 burners that sort of worked. The potluck took place in the 9th and 10th grade room, and so they pushed all the chairs and desks and tables out of the way. For a long time, it had a wood parquet floor. At one time, there was a leak, and the floors buckled, and they ended up having to pull that out and put in carpet. Can you imagine having potluck in that classroom, which is now the 3rd and 4th grade room? It's a little bigger than the other 3 rooms, or 2 rooms at least, but not very much. So Nadine, at this point, is a full-time secretary And she described working with the staff as a bunch of friends who get to work together. And we were a fairly small staff, pretty much the same age, and so we had a lot of good times. At that point, we split off 1-2 instead of 1-2-3, and Terry got to be the first and second grade teacher. Previous it had been 1-2-3, and then 4-5, so John got to stop teaching, 3-4, and then 5-6, so John got to stop teaching 4-5-6, and 7-8, and then 9-10. It's at this point, when the Rathbuns are here, that MLAJA becomes a word. Before that, we always said Mother Lode Adventist Junior Academy. And so Dan came up with the idea of pronouncing it as MLAJA. And it could be that it's just as well known in the county as Mother Lode Adventist Junior Academy, maybe more so, especially since we used to have a Mother Lode Christian Academy here. We were always getting mixed up with that. I still like SAS. At one point, about 1984, the school board decided they would love to have a kindergarten program going. My wife had taken off a couple of years to have our son, and Leon Grabo, who was the board chairman at a board meeting, volunteered his wife to babysit our son, who was 2 years old, more or less. I'm not sure how Darlene felt about that, but she was very gracious, and she did it for a couple of years, and so we started K-Pre first. And the connection between church and school, we had no classroom for K-Pre first, so the church gave up a Sabbath school room, and I think my wife was over here, I want to say 17 years, but that may be too many. She was over here for a long, long time before they put the portable in, which allowed John to move up there, and then K-Pre first to move in. So by 1987, we had 125 students. We had a pretty good spirit on campus, and things were going pretty well. So Dan left, and we had Everett Perry, who put off retirement for a year and spent 1 year with us between longer-term principals. And so it's a pretty quiet year. He's just holding down the fort. They began to think about a new pump house and a garage, but nothing happened then. And so then we go, there's Everett Perry, calm year, no major building projects. Mike Salazzo is our next principal. And when he arrived, he also brought with him, they also hired 3 new teachers. So we have kind of, in my opinion, 2 groups of teachers. We have some who stay quite a while, and then we have some who are here a few years and go someplace else. And some people want to come here. Some people come here because that's where they find a job. My wife and I were so happy to get out of Southern California. We thought when we had arrived here with grass and trees and green, we thought we'd arrived. Couldn't imagine a better place to teach. I guess that's why I stuck around a while. Mike Salazzo was a character. He would go up to the little kids, and he would sometimes ask them, are you married yet? And to a first grader or a second grader, they're not quite sure how to react to that. He was a builder. He built a wooden school bus and some other play equipment in the play area. He loved to keep the school in good working order, kept it well maintained. He helped to build the garage, and that was supposed to be a place to park the Suburban when we had one. I'm not sure, well, for a year or 2 we parked it up there, but that didn't last very long. There's always somebody that needs that space. Mike's big claim to fame maybe is the work-study program. Some of you students might remember work-study. It was a real mixed bag. We got a lot of work done. Kids worked for a half an hour, and they got paid on a sliding scale from 25 cents to 50 cents maybe, depending upon the grade they were in. So we're talking 7th through 10th graders. We loved it because lots of things got done. We hated it because we teachers had to take a half an hour and supervise. And there are always some kids that would rather not work quite as hard as you might wish. I particularly remember Rudy Dennis kept the gym spotless. And if any of you worked with him, that was kind of a coveted job, I think, to go there and become part of that team. So it's during Mike's time that they put in the portable up there, which was supposed to be just temporary for a few years while they're looking for a permanent solution. And that was in the 90s, and it's still there and still being used. I'm not sure, is it being used as a classroom or a library, the portable? For years, it was John's room. And I always thought it kind of funny. John loved being around people. He thrived with lots of people around. And there he was, stuck up there by himself. I always thought I should have gotten up there because I was happy if I didn't have that many people around. But anyway, when they put that up, then my wife could come out of exile here in the church and go back over to the school. And she also probably liked being around people more than some. I always kind of wondered about her. They had to keep these back doors open. The office is up here, and sometimes it wasn't staffed every day. And we used to have people walk through the hallway occasionally, and this is before cell phones, and there was no phone in the classroom, in the Sabbath school classroom. Kind of gave me the creeps, but it seemed to work out okay. Among other things, Janet was a secretary, and she also taught keyboarding. And she was a professional secretary. She trained in college for that. And so she was a whiz-bang typing teacher. And when I got stuck doing it before and after, I felt sorry for the kids. Next principal, Stan Baldwin. So there is Stan in the middle. And last I heard, he was living in Arizona. And that's my wife on the right side, and Gunny Navat, who brought her son there to be in kindergarten pre-first, and he went on to first grade, and she stayed for several years. I don't know, I think she could have advanced, but she chose not to. Stan, among other things, bought a VW that he wanted the kids to work on, and they were going to rebuild parts of it, a dune buggy. Unfortunately, it never got completed during his time period, so that ended up getting sold eventually. He was very professional. He was very motivated for academics. He could build, and we had elaborate sets at Christmas. I think it's maybe during Stan's era that we had a 2-story stage up here for kids to be at different levels, and using the gymnasium. So he was really good about that. He made sure that things worked well physically. We did an interesting experience once called a refugee experience. We had the kids sleep in cardboard boxes overnight out on the field. And as the kids came through, anybody here do that? You did? Oh, you were here too, Melody. Okay, so there's a few of you that experienced that. As they came through, we searched their baggage looking for contraband. But naturally, they got some stuff past us. The important snacks. What's that? Yeah, we fed them. We had an excellent diet. It was little energy bars that tasted like cardboard. Yeah, they came from ADRA, and that's what they give out to people who have nothing else. And these things were terrible tasting, but they had all the nutrients that you needed to survive. So we kept the kids occupied in the evening, put them to bed. They built their own shelters wherever they wanted in the field. Mind you, the field was not fenced in. And Julie Lewis and Stan Baldwin and I stayed up all night walking around. to make sure that the kids were where they were supposed to be and nobody else was on campus that shouldn't be. We did have one guy walk across the field diagonally, at like 2 in the morning. So that was a little bit creepy. Anyway, so we walked around because it was kind of cool. And Stan Baldwin disappeared for 2 or 3 hours. We have no idea to this day where he went or what he did. We think he went and got into his car and took a nap. We didn't ask. Anyway, we speculated about that for quite a while. It's during that time period that we began to get a little more organized with computers, and we had our first school webpage. In 7th and 8th grade, I had 30, or I remember 31 students, which was a pretty full classroom, because typically it runs in the high teens, low 20s. So that was fairly high. Of course, another year I had 7 7th and 8th grade kids, which doesn't pay for me, or didn't pay for me. And one year, I had homeroom 5, 6, 7, 8, because enrollment just fluctuates just like crazy. Rod came as a teacher, having been a student here. And did you teach 2 years, Rod? 1 year, 2 years? 4 years? Before you became principal? 1 year. Okay. And then Stan left, and Rod became the principal, and then was here for another 5 years with us. So he was, or 4 years rather. So he was our principal, and his claim to fame probably was organizing field trips. And so he had kids going all over with learning through discovery, back to the East Coast, to Central America, Belize, Costa Rica, and these were educational trips. They weren't sightseeing entirely, certainly some sightseeing, but learning on site and helping out a school or a church. And it's one time in Costa Rica that he came across a teacher. Was she the principal, Emily? So she was a teaching principal in a small school down there, and he thought she would do well in the States. She was an American, spoke flawless English as well as flawless Spanish. And so Rod began working, how could he get her up here to the States? She ended up coming up here and was an aide for a few years, finished her college education, became a principal, and later you'll see she comes back to join us. Jeff Johnson had been a student here. He finished college, came back, and was a task force worker. So over the years that I've been here, we had 3 different task force workers. While Rod was here, we acquired Kitty College, the preschool across the street. And in addition to organizing field trips, Rod was a fabulous choral director. So we had some great choral programs and loved photography. So kind of an all-around thing. At one point, we had 6 girls who wanted to sing together, and they wanted to cut a CD. And so Rod made sure they had everything they needed. They got permission to sing the songs. He took the pictures. The kids could never find a picture with all 6 of them that they were happy about how they looked. So I don't know, Rod, if you ended up photoshopping something. I think so, to improve the situation, and finally they produced their CD. We had 2 Suburbans, a good one and not such a good one. And they were parked down here behind the church. And well, one time somebody called and said, I can't remember exactly who. They said, "Are you missing a Suburban?" And Janet said, "No, we've got 2 Suburbans." And then Jim McMurray, who's working as a chaplain, says, well, at another point, the talk at the jail is that they stole a Suburban. And Janet said, "No, I'm sure we have ours." So she walked out to look, and yeah, we were missing a Suburban. So we managed to get that back. I think it was actually maybe over in Yosemite area by the time we got it. And one last thing about Rod, he had a fish. He had a pet fish, very, very genteel, loving fish named Oscar. And if you walked by his aquarium and you got too close, Oscar was trying to take your arm off. Rod used to feed him by hand until at one point, I believe he cut you pretty badly on your thumb or finger, at least enough that you learned not to feed him by hand. And when Rod left, it was a real chore to get that fish transported to a bigger aquarium and find somebody brave enough to take him. Next, we've got Bob Chinnick, Robert Bob Chinnick. Bob had been a principal and decided that he wanted to retire in the Sonora area, and he knew that principals lasted longer than teachers. No, let me get that the other way around. Teachers lasted longer than principals, and he wanted to stay here. So he came as a teacher. And after teaching a short while, they leaned on him to become a principal. Reluctantly, he agreed that he would do that short term. And so he did that. His approach to being principal was show up 6:30, 6:15 in the morning. It's quiet, get things done. And then when school's out, go home at a reasonable hour. And so that worked out very well for him because he's a minimalist. He was very organized, and he kept faculty meetings brief. And unfortunately, as time went on with many of our principals, the conference discovered that they were pretty good people, and they kept dragging him down to the conference office for meetings. So Bob was here for a while, and during this time period, we had a school evaluation, and according to Janet's notes, we were given a 6-year term, which was better than we'd ever had. We'd had several 5-year terms. We set up a Mac lab when Bob was here. And at this point, the church had been funding and working and raising money for an endowment fund. And the deal was when we broke $1 million, they could take the interest and use it to help kids with tuition. And so during Bob's time, we broke $1 million, and at one point we were paying each student, we were subsidizing each student, I think, $75 a month. Unfortunately, that didn't last forever. So Emily, the lady that Rod picked up in Belize, she and her husband moved up here, and she came back to Sonora as the principal. And so she started off in 2007 as our principal, was here for 7 years. And she was a calming influence and a warrior for God. And if we had something to deal with, it was always, let's pray about it. That was her approach. And we had lots of student activities going on during her time period, weeks of prayer and field trips to Pinecrest and King Tut in San Francisco and quite a few things. We had our first silent auction with Home and School. You'll hear more about that later. And it started off small. It's become a phenomenal fundraiser for scholarships. Hector, her husband, was actually very professional, but when he was up here, he did our grounds and volunteered most of the time and kept the place looking really good. Then when Emily left, we had Patty Osborne. She'd been a teacher in Albuquerque. She then worked at the conference for a couple of years and decided she wanted to be back with kids. So she came here and became our principal. She was very creative. She always had art projects going on. Always, her room was always bedlam. And the kids were busy and they were doing things, but my classroom was next door, and sometimes I could hear her classroom, and I would worry that maybe they had tied her up or something. So I would sometimes sneak next door and open the door just to see if everything was okay. But then I had the same problem in the hallway. People would come in and talk to the secretaries, and you get 3 or 4 people talking to the secretary, and I'm trying to teach, and the room is sort of quiet. I don't know if I ever came out and spoke to any of you out in the hallway, but I did, several times. Patty also liked to do big field trips, and her last year or maybe two, she switched from 5 and 6, which is what she taught for years, switched to teach 7th and 8th, as well as being principal. It's tough to be a homeroom teacher and be a principal. And some of us, I can't say this, are smart enough not to have tried. And then when she left, Jeff McRae came, and he was here for 3 years. And he, as I understand, because I had retired at this point, not because Jeff came, but just because it was time, loved to play soccer with the kids, and so he could be out on the field quite a bit. If we didn't have a janitor show up, he was happy to get out and take care of things, and he liked to make connections with parents. And then Andrew was here, and Andrew, really knowledgeable about procedures and about policies and got things organized, and it was great for that time period for him to get things kind of up to speed. Very, very consistent. And now we have Amy Miller, and she's calling herself the head teacher, I guess. So she's the 9th and 10th grade teacher and does principal jobs. She's the one on the right, in case you're having trouble figuring that out. We had 3 secretaries who were here long-term. We had several others who were great, but they only stayed a year or 2. So we had Nadine, who was here for 14 years. And if you look at the bottom there, April, who's our current principal, when she was a youngster, she told somebody that when she grew up, she wanted to be a school secretary, just like Nadine. And April is, and has been now for 7 years, the school secretary. And Janet Johnson in the middle there for 18 years. Secretaries hold the school together. And that's probably true at the church office, no offense, pastors. But they're the people who make things run. So can't live without them. I think back to Nadine. When she was working full-time, a lot of the time the church did not have a full-time secretary. And so anything that needed to be done, even involving the church, had to go through Nadine. She had the keys and she had the master schedule and everything. That was right up her alley because she loved to talk to people. She got a lot done. She was very organized, but she loved to talk to people. So that was good for her and good for the community. So I mentioned some teachers stay a while and some not as long. You can see from this list in no particular order that we've had a number of teachers who stayed here a number of years. And that says something to me about the church, and it says something about the school boards. It says a lot about the community, the parents, and the quality of kids. I spent some time in a hospital, and I used to ask staff, how long have you been here? And man, if they had been working at that hospital for 20 years or 25 or 30, that told me that was probably a pretty good place to be. So my hat's off to you guys, the community, for making this happen. So I'm winding down, really. I didn't hear a bell, but I kind of am running out of things anyway. So kind of the connection between church and school. It seems like the church has been extremely generous with the school. From the buildings, the gymnasium, my goodness, I remember when they did the fundraiser for that, they raised money in a pretty short order. People were generous. Just before I left, they put a new roof on the old building, and community church people, kids, parents came out and helped re-shingle that. We've done, as a school, a lot of community service projects thanks to Jim Grossman. We have many times been on Big Hill picking up trash, many times, and other places too. And it's been good for the kids, And sometimes we got it in the paper. A lot of times we didn't bother. We weren't doing it for that. So again, church supporting the school. Work bees. My goodness, a school work bee before school opens, and you get 100 people from the church coming to help. That's amazing. Letting us have different classrooms. K Pre-First was in here for years and years. 9th and 10th grade had a homeroom in here for several years. Handbells for years and years. Choir over here for years. Church has been very generous. Worthy student. So in addition to home and school and the silent auction raising money, the church has been extremely generous. The pastors, I can't say enough about the pastors. Coming on campus and doing weeks of prayer, coming week after week for a Bible class, coming over to play with the kids, getting to know the kids, being involved, just amazing. I always feel like the school didn't do their share in terms of helping out the church, but we did try to do Christmas programs and those kinds of things, graduation, music groups, bands and choirs and so on. And a lot of our kids, I think, became terrific leaders. We often heard they were great students and good leaders at MBA, I don't think the school can take very much of the credit. I think a lot of it comes from kids being up in front at church, wired programs, Pathfinders. Man, we've had some awesome Pathfinder years, many of those. So again, lots of benefits for the school and hopefully for the church. School board. Think about the people that have gone to meetings and sit and make decisions that affect the school. Phenomenal. Home and school, can't say enough about them. And as a matter of fact, I think you'll hear more about that tomorrow, a little bit anyway. And I guess I'll put in a plug for Fall Festival next Saturday night. It's what? Thursday? Thursday outside. Well, now that's new. So that's something that you might want to come to. That's become quite the tradition. And so lots of things going on that keep the kids busy, keep the kids out of mischief. So it seems like teachers sometimes, that could be me, had to suffer some indignities at the hands of students. So this is Fall Festival some years ago, and I asked for whipped cream. I wasn't putting up with that shaving cream stuff, but I don't know, I never tasted it, I was afraid. So had to put up with that. The first couple of years I was here, we did it on a Sunday, and we had a dunk tank that we put out here. Some of you guys remember that. They finally took the dunk tank away and wouldn't loan it to us. Every year that I did it as a 7th and 8th grade sponsor, I filled it up, I drained the hot water tank from the church, and then I topped it off with cold water. Because I thought, man, I'm gonna have to go in here, and I wanna make it as comfortable as possible. But then you also get things like this, where I got a gift-wrapped car. I was really hoping it was a new car, but it was the same old car. They just gift-wrapped it for me. And then a typical Friday afternoon. I don't know, maybe it could be a Monday morning, but it's a Friday afternoon because they always use my classroom for Sabbath school, and I didn't want any Sabbath school people coming over and becoming ill as they looked in the desks. So they would sometimes dump their own desks. I took great pleasure in dumping their desks if necessary, but I always gave them a warning, so it wasn't a surprise. Anyway, thank you, church, for your help with the school.
I am stepping in for Shauna tonight. Shauna all week long has been going, my daughter's sick. I don't want to be sick for Friday. But as life would have it, she was sick for Friday. And asked if I would share a bit about Kitty College. Marisa had just started working for Rate of Fair in the purchasing department at the hospital. She was excited. She had just laid down a job of directorship in a local child care center, and she was going to do a normal thing for a while. And she hadn't been there but 1 week when she heard that Kitty College was looking for a director, so she decided to lay real low. She didn't answer the phone if she could help it. She didn't have anything to do with anybody if she could help it, which of course was impossible. But they found her anyway. And within 3 months, Ray had to give her up for leading out in Kitty College. She was there for 25 years. She has been a mainstay during a lot of my experience at Kitty College, and I appreciate her talents very much. Kitty College is a school with 35 students per day. However, in the day, it depends on the day as to what students are there. We have 4 classes. We have classes for the teddy bear class. We have the honey horse class. We have 2 honey horse classes some days. Some days we have 2 teddy bear classes because it changes from day to day. We minister to about 40 to 50 community families each year. With every 3 years, it changes because our kids start at age 2 and they go up to the kindergarten. In 2004, about the time of the hospital's move, Rod and the hospital made an agreement to join Kitty College with MLAJA. And we were all excited about that. We've found, though, that in joining a school with a preschool, there's a lot of challenges. It can be done very successfully. We know people who've done it very successfully. But we have found that the state has particular mandates that make it exceptionally difficult to join them together. However, Marisa was still glad that we were part of the MLAJA group because she could expand the curriculum and include more Christ-centered things and more Bible-centered stories and school curriculum. The goal of Kitty College is to be a safe and loving atmosphere for children to learn of Jesus. Now that is a wonderful goal. Would you like to know about the reality? When Karen Heflin is one of our teachers, and she's holding 2 kids like this apart because of the fact that they're determined that they are going to kill each other. It is a real challenge to teach sometimes, and it is a real challenge for the kids to be ready for each step. Potty training isn't really that great of a thing to do. Marisa had always hoped that every year that we would have all potty trained kids. Not all kids potty train at the age of 2. Sometimes they don't potty train till the age of 4, which is, again, a growing thing, a challenge. 2 years ago, Marisa stepped down and became retired. This week, she was there 4 days. That is her retirement. We are still challenged as far as getting teachers. We are still challenged to have as much a connection with MLAJA as we would like, especially since the conference is kind of pulling us in different directions. But I am thankful to be part of Kitty College, to be part of MLAJA, to be part of this group. Our special treat for the Honey Horse class, the kids that are getting ready to go to kindergarten in the next year, is to be with Stephanie, who teaches them Spanish. They love her. It is so special to be connected with the program that we are connected with. And our prayer is that each family who uses Kitty College will grow in their relationships with each other and with God. And we pray that each child will learn that Jesus loves them and that they will be loved by him wherever they go in life. I do have one question. Are any children or any of the people who are here tonight, did any of you go to Kitty College? Yay! I was in line at Sonora High the other day. Sonora Elementary the other day. And this kid comes, "Teacher, teacher, I know you. You were my teacher at Kitty College." And it's really interesting because Marisa talks about that, and so do most of the other teachers of the experience of mentoring kids in a way that they will remember, and by God's grace, till eternity.
When I came to Sonora, the previous job I had was working on the youth evangelism team. It was a group of young adults that traveled to various churches and schools in our conference. We did a lot of week of prayers, we taught a lot of Bible classes, we were on a lot of playgrounds, hanging out with kids, we did youth prayer conference and all sorts of things. So I was able to travel and see a lot of the other churches and campuses, school campuses in our conference. And in my mind, this was my favorite. Sonora is a special place. Amen? So, it's a good place. So when I got the opportunity to come hang out here for a couple years before going to seminary, I was just thrilled. And it was so neat how warm and welcoming this church is and how welcomed I felt just stepping into ministry here. Obviously, tonight is largely about the education side of things, but working as the associate pastor for youth and young adults, I was interacting with the kids here in church, there at the school, and all over the place. So many memories. I won't take time to share them all, but I was thinking back on some of the highlights. I loved how active the school was. Being an active person myself, I got to go on the activities as well. And the teachers were thrilled to have another driver and to have somebody that was willing to go along, like with the Chinook family, going out on the backpacking trip and having fun with the kids. Going to Catalina Island for outdoor education. How many school groups get to go to places like that? That's pretty awesome. Or youth group trips to places like Lake Eleanor or Utica Reservoir. I don't know if you know this, but not all of California is as pretty as it is here. I come from the lowlands. I work in Modesto, although we do have Smith Ranch, which is right beside us, which is awesome. But being able to take the kids out and not have to drive very far to get to these places was amazing. And of course, Belize has been mentioned a couple times tonight. Being able to go to Belize and having a school and teachers that were supportive of our youth group mission trips is pretty encouraging. And I'm just curious, is there anyone here tonight that was able to go on any of our Belize trips? Yeah, so many hands. And probably a lot of the rest of you donated to make it possible. But there's a lasting difference there in southern Belize because of what has happened. I think about not only the buildings that we built, but the lives that we impacted. Even baptizing Becky's brother, he made a decision to follow Jesus. And it was there in Belize that those sorts of things happened. Of course, being a rock climber, I loved being so close to the rocks and the hiking. It's a special area to be able, on a Sabbath afternoon, to be able to just say, hey, let's go on a hike. And all of the amazing places that this church and this school has access to. And I love the ski program. Being a skier myself, being able to take a day and go skiing with the kids, doesn't get any better than that. Not many schools have ski programs. This is a special place to go to school, a special place to worship. Going on band tour, brushing off my old trombone, playing with the students there. You know, the roller skating, not many churches have gymnasiums. Not many churches have roller skating. This is a special place. I'm pretty sure some of the churches down in Modesto have skates, but I've never seen them being used. This is a special place to be. I always loved how supportive the teachers were on Wednesday nights when we had our Wired youth group. They were supportive, and they tried to lighten the load a little bit so it wasn't as intense for the kids on Thursdays, so they could go to Wired and play massive games of knockout with the kids in the gymnasium and have good food and Bible study and fellowship or Pathfinders on another day. But as I thought about my time here, I remember it was shorter than I wanted it to be. The conference brethren said, it's time for you to go, and I wasn't ready to leave, but God had other plans. And I remember some of the members joking, saying, well, when you go to seminary, you're going to go find a wife. Ha, 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 yeah, okay, whatever. Well, I went to seminary, and that's where I found my wife. And you'll get to see her tomorrow and our little baby, Emmeline, tomorrow morning. So sometimes the things that you joke about come to pass. Now, Brian Simmons, he was able to find his wife right here. So you never know how things are going to go. But as I was reflecting on my memories, I think one of my favorite weekends in Sonora was a Sabbath when we woke up and there was a whole bunch of snow on the ground. And there was no power at the church. Some of you couldn't get out of your driveways. But the people who were able to make it out to church, we had services in the fireside room. And we used it as the fireside room with a fire, and we worshiped. And does anyone remember that day? That was just such a special Sabbath. And it kind of epitomized what we have here, which is this special sense of community and love for one another. Being on other school campuses and church campuses, not all schools and churches get along as well as these ones do here. So thanks for allowing me to reminisce about my time here, and enjoy what you have, because it's a blessing for sure.
What a joy to be back home. And yet how odd to call it home, because as I look around and think about my time here, it started in 1970, and for all practical purposes ended in 1981 when I went to Monterey Bay Academy. Those of you who know how that goes, you go away to school and get to come home on a weekend once every 6 weeks. And then if you're lucky enough to find a summer job, and my father always employed me, maybe you had a summer or two here, and then it was off to college. So I consider myself a Sonora boy, but it's been many years. My family has been here 51 years. It was just this year that we sold my mom and dad's home. Some of you may know my father, Russell, passed away in 2018, and my mother, Sally, sends her greetings from Camarillo, where she's in a care facility. Very nice little home there in the Camarillo Hills, and close to my sister, Carrie, who will be here tomorrow, and close to me in Glendale, California, where I reside. For those who don't know me, my name is Greg Honus, and it's just great to be back. When we moved to Sonora, it was a town, and I mean literally a town, not a city. It was just a step above a village. It had just gotten its brand new stoplight at Main Street, at the corner there where the 120, the 108, and the 49 meet. There were a few restaurants to speak of. We could name a few, but none of them were vegetarian, so it didn't really matter. And East Sonora wasn't developed beyond Phoenix Lake area or Greeley Hill. Now, this town is still very white. Remember that I've been in LA for most of my adult life, so it's always a bit of a culture shock. But when we came here, it was not diverse. I remember being in the grocery store and seeing black people for the very first time. I think I made quite a scene. It wasn't that I was upset or had anything negative about that experience. It was just such a novelty and surprise. We had in MLAJA, during my 10 years there, which was 71 to 81, one half Mexican child for 1 year in my 10 years there. And that child was Bobby Montano, and he lived with us. We could tell other stories. So that was Sonora as a town: mining, stone quarries, timber, recreation, Doddridge, Pinecrest Lake, Sonora Pass, Yosemite, New Maloney's, Tulloch, Don Pedro, and tourism with Angels Camp and Murphy's and Old Columbia. That was the town. The church, brand new. I don't remember the exact year construction was finished. I think, Mr. Carl, you mentioned it. 69, that sounds right to me. It had just been completed. Gold and green everywhere, just like the old appliances you ripped out of your home 20 years ago. That was quite the building. With the up and down lighting, the cans, and choir loft over here. There was no organ. And the controversy of the day was that where the baptistry is, there was a cross-like structure that was part of the infrastructure. And of course, that was a grave violation of Ellen White's counsel, and some of the saints were very unhappy about that architectural feature. Well, that was the church. There were some interesting features about church and school that I'd like to just hit on, and since we don't have a whole lot of time, many others need to speak this evening. First of all, Sonora was a place where there were a far more than normal number of adopted people. My family is all adopted children from different families, and when we came here, we discovered, much to our delight, the Olsons had 5. We had 3. The Fausts had 2. The Winchesters had 2. The Moes had 2, the Ericks had 1, and later Larry Davis had 1. And I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out, and if I have, forgive me, come to me afterward and we'll add you to the list. I would say at any given time during my time here, in which there were probably 60 to 75 students any given year, 15 to 20% of the enrollment was adopted children. It was a remarkable, remarkable thing. I want to do some research and find out if there was something that circulated that said, hey, we can expand the biological growth rate of the Adventist church beyond our own children if you'll just adopt children that are up for adoption. That may have been the plan. Not a bad idea, really. The other feature that was interesting about this whole compound, which has been briefly described, hospital built in the 50s, church that came along in 69, school built in 56, did you say? 64, it was actually constructed, 64. These structures formed what I would call the cradle-to-grave motif that Adventism was so good at so many years ago. You could be born and you could die in the hospital. We had housing for you to live in right around here, especially as you got older. And we had a church for you to go to and a place for you to be educated. It was cradle to grave, and frankly, it was wonderful. Everything that we could have wanted was here. I am so appreciative of what's been said leading up to this. I just want to say, Mr. Carl, you were Mr. Carl to me, that I remember well your first year here. He wasn't clearly not from Sonora. Kind of curly hair. He's right about the tie and the kind of formal demeanor and dress, very proper. And had some unusual things. When we asked him a little bit about himself, he, as I recall anyway, and if I've got it wrong, forgive me, he liked badminton, cross-country skiing, which he turned into downhill skiing. He said he learned to downhill ski, but he was a telemarker. You know what that is? It's that kind of, kind of thing that you do that just takes incredible leg strength, okay? And real men telemark, all right? I just want to go on record with that. And he liked Lancia cars. And it's Sonora. Who ever heard of a Lancia, So those of us who were car buffs, I think, had some idea. And, Rebecca, thank you for saying that you were not Shauna. Because for a moment there, I was thinking my memory was far worse than I had imagined. And was really struggling, like, that just doesn't look like Shauna. Okay. So that was a bit of relief. Another feature of this community that really came out of school and church together in the way in which we were taught and organized was a sense of mission. You hear this in the reports of Brazil and other places various principals were adept at leading students to. But in our day, it was student mission programs through college. And a lot of Sonora people went on to do student mission programs in college during my era. Cheryl Banks Tay went to Japan. And Eric Olson and Bill Olson and John Wood and David Banks and I all went to Korea. And Karen Banks Tilstra went to Indonesia. And again, I'm confident I'm missing somebody, so again, forgive me. But probably somebody, did any of the Proctors go to Micronesia? Am I remembering that? Thailand, okay. All right, thank you for clarifying. So it really produced a group of people that were spiritually dedicated and grounded and wanted to make a difference in the world. And that was a product of church and school together, because one of the things I will say about the church is that in 1970 when I came, one of the interesting features was the fact that each of the pastors had their sort of own unique gift that they brought, and own unique strength. You've mentioned this too. Clyde Mundy was my first pastor. His son Dan was my first counselor at Wawona. Stanley Harris and Fred Thompson were here together, and Fred was the one who studied with us kids in the primary room and baptized my generation. Darrell Lehman had a passion for music and made sure this organ got installed and raised funds for that. His associate, Tim Mitchell, and he both inspired me to want to enter ministry. Lee Tripp and Richard Smith and Jim McMurray and Irvin Thompson and, of course, Nathan Renner and others between. Paul Mathis was mentioned. And I didn't know Paul well, but I knew that he was the one who got the gym and made that possible by sitting on the steps of City Hall until they just couldn't take it anymore. It takes a very special person to do something like that. I, unfortunately, never got to enjoy the gymnasium. I don't know whether it was a conspiracy or what, but when I left Sonora, the gymnasium got built, my father bought a boat, and my father built a pool at our house. Greg, we're glad that you've moved on. Thank you. Now we're going to do the things that you always talked about. Bitter, party of one. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. No, but each pastor brought a new strength, and it was incredible. Our story is not unique. Many of you have long-term commitments to this place and a deep love for it, but the Honus family put 51 years into Adventist education here. I went 10 years there, my sister Carrie 10 years, and my sister Marcella 10 years. Her two children, who you would know as Noah and Juliet, put in 10 years. And Bobby Montana was there for a year, a student who stayed with us. One of the interesting features, too, about the 10th-grade education system is that when I started, kindergarten was verboten. Ellen White had counseled against it, so there was no kindergarten. So guess what? We all went to Sonora Public School kindergarten and then transitioned to first grade over here. That wasn't a bad experience. It was a good experience. And the academic reputation of the school and our reputation as we went different places was different than other schools. It's been mentioned that we were treated well at Dodge Ridge, and so we were, but we were well behaved. We weren't unruly in line. We were cooperative with everybody. We thanked people who served us. We brought our equipment back on time and unbroken for the most part. It's astounding to me, but my first year there, they still used cable bindings. That's how long ago that was, right? We also took driver's ed at Sonora High. Now you can imagine what it was like to walk into a classroom at Sonora High wearing corduroys and a nice shirt and a belt and shoes and having kids just start to chuckle. We knew we were going to have a long quarter until the teacher spoke up. And here's what he said: "Shut up, everybody. The A's just walked in." Yeah, it wasn't a hard class. Let's just put it that way. Academics were great, but they weren't always perfect either. My typing teacher, some of you may remember Marvin Sundin, son of Dr. Sundin in the Santa Cruz area and part of the Sundin Foundation. Anyway, Marvin Sundin was legally blind, and he was my typing teacher. I don't know how I got through a doctoral degree because, well, I can still use more than 2 fingers, but my approach to typing was to eat my lunch so that I could play basketball with my friends immediately after typing and not worry about it, and then to do like 34 assignments the night before they were due at the end of the quarter. So my wife has always wondered why I'm not a better typist, and now we know why. It was me. And it didn't help that we had a blind typing teacher. Well, any one of us could go on with story after story. But I want to say each of us has a unique experience to share, and mine briefly looks like this. I too experienced people asking, "What's a mother's load?" And I wasn't very nice about it. I wish I had been a little more patient, but I just kind of looked at them with incredulity and said, "What are you, stupid? It's gold." Haven't you ever read history? It's just Tuolumne County, for crying out loud. My first and second grade chapter of my time here ended tragically. It was a couple weeks before school was to end, and we got a phone call at home and the bad news that our teacher had been killed in a car accident. I couldn't get my mind around that, and tonight at the end of this program we're going to sing Side by Side, and I can't help but remember this pathetic and just bereaved group of first and second graders walking down this center aisle playing their ukuleles, singing that song at her funeral. Her name was Midianita Mucha, and she has not been mentioned this evening. She died on the Oakland Bridge in 1973. Grade 3 was made elegant for all of us with Mrs. Annette Reeves' emphasis on handwriting art and the privileges of reading in a repurposed bathtub. Yes, she had put a bathtub in the corner of the classroom with cushions so we could enjoy. Grade 4 was atypical in that my year we were in a trailer. And I think the teacher's name was Mrs. Henderson, but blanking out on that. I think I've got that wrong, actually. But the school had grown to a point that a 5th classroom was required. When we moved into 5th and 6th grade room, that's where Mr. Moy was. And by the time we got to 7th, it was Merlin Reeves, his last year there. Grade 8 was Ken Dull. And you can imagine what we did to that poor man with a name like that. And grades 9 and 10 were our homeroom with Mr. Roy Ingham. We want to say our schools are evangelistic, and I really hope that they are, but as I think back to my time, I don't know that any of our non-Adventist students we know the whereabouts of or if they're around. I think of Trina Threlkeld, Brad Leslie, Kirk Furlong, Annette Lemon, Robert Brown, and one or two others. It's been said, this is a unique and special place, and so it is. And what I want to leave you with is that the spiritual formation that I received here with this cradle-to-grave situation, with contact with hospital people because of my father, with church life here, and back in the day that you could employ young people. It was not illegal for children to work. So I cleaned the church, I cleaned the school. It was a grounding, it was a blessing. The music program and taking piano lessons with Tia Betty, like so many of you have. How many of you have taken lessons from Tia Betty? Yeah, I wish I still played. I mean, I can get through a hymn if I have to, but yeah. So many blessings. And then the school and the daily Bible classes and the constant friendships, fellowships. They say it takes a village to raise a child, but I would say it takes a community to raise a Christian one.
I think the last time I was in this church, Greg was 12, Alan Pratt was probably 10, and Rob Curbs, you were little. But,
Just in time, my mom is just coming.
So we represent the 60s and the 70s.
Yes.
Greg picked up the 80s, and here was this century. Anyway, yes.
Okay, I just realized tonight, actually, I was in the second high school class after they added 9th and 10th, and I didn't realize that. But I'll tell you that coming to school in the 9th grade here was such a relief to me. Now, you might think it was because I wanted to have a Christian education or I wanted to go and meet new people, but really what it was is we lived out on Phoenix Lake Road, and our neighbor, our very good friend, was a teacher at Sonora High. He was actually the wrestling coach and driver's ed teacher, and I heard him talk to my parents all the time about the kids at Sonora High and freshman initiation. I heard that ever since, I don't know, 3rd or 4th grade, and I was petrified of going to Sonora High as a freshman. So when my parents joined the church, I was graduating from 8th grade. And when my mom and dad, and there's my mom right there, said, you're going to go to a new school. It's called Mother Lowe Junior Academy. And it's sort of small. You'll be in the 9th and 10th grade classroom with 10 kids. And I thought, I can do this. I can do this. Thank you, Jesus. I can do this. There were 4 in my freshman class. And so it was a walk in the park for me.
So when we I'm Karen Banks Tilstra, Debbie Banks Gungle. Our sister who just came in, Cheryl Ann Banks Tay. And we had, when we joined the church, we had 5 in our family. And shortly after the Stobaugh family came, within months, and they had 6. And then the Stickneys arrived, and they had 5.
So in the matter of 1.5 years, 21 kids joined the school. And so we were welcome. But
it was the baby boom years.
Yes. We, and the church here was so welcoming to us. My dad was a logger. So, and everybody that belonged to the church at that point either worked at the school or the hospital that was right there. So, as a logging family, I always felt like we were the herdmans coming in to a church. If you know the best Christmas pageant ever, the herdman children. It's like, I think we kind of shocked them. But they were so loving to us, and we learned a lot from, well, you're going to talk about what we're going to emphasize here is what the church did for the school, because that was kind of our emphasis. As we came into the church, they did a lot.
Right. My parents were sort of looking for a church family, and it ended up my mom had to go to Sonora Medical Group, and she met the Boyces, and we have an aunt who was Adventist, and we were always, my thing anyway, was like, that's sort of a strange religion. She couldn't wear a wedding ring, because remember, this is like the 60s, so she couldn't wear a wedding ring, and they had some other things that were sort of different, but she was like the sweetest person ever. But anyway, through Sonora Community Hospital, my parents met the Boyces, and we started having Bible study. So Pat Boyce and Mrs. Stout came and gave Karen and I Bible studies, while Doris Payne, I think her name was, came and gave my mom and dad Bible studies.
So Doris Payne was the Bible worker here at the school, or at the church. But we were so relieved when my mother spent some time in the hospital here, because being in the logging communities, a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses were working with my dad, and they were very, very eager to get him to join the church, their church, and they would come to our house every Wednesday night with kind of a large carpet bag and do Bible studies. And my sister and I were very worried that my parents were going to join the Jehovah's Witnesses because they didn't celebrate Christmas. So when my mom got into the hospital over here, and Pastor Crick was giving her Bible studies in the hospital, they started coming to our house to give us Bible studies. We realized the Adventists celebrated Christmas, so we said, please join that church. And so we had a very lofty reason for wanting to, but from that point on, they took us in, and Dr. Boyce, who has been mentioned a few times here, but he and Dr. Ansbach really are the reason all this exists. They started the first hospital up in Sonora with 6 beds. And then all through our years, Cheryl Calderero, Sherry Harrison, all of us, we worked at the hospital. He always gave us jobs. And that was his real commitment. He said, if I can help you have jobs to get to school and pay your tuition, he felt the hospital had served a very valuable mission. And hospital housekeeping every summer for all through academy and through college. I was kind of shocked to see the hospital doesn't exist anymore. But we did clean it at one point.
Yes. Everyone has talked about the wonderful programs at the school, and I loved the skiing programs. From here, I went to Mount Ellis Academy for the sole purpose of skiing, because they had their own ski hill.
They did, but they didn't monitor you either. You could ski all the time. So I was there my sophomore year because they didn't have a sophomore class the year I was a sophomore here, because there wasn't enough students, so I followed my sister to Mount Ellis and skied the whole year. Totally failed my sophomore year, so my parents said MBA, my junior and senior, which I thought was such a punishment. Now, MBA.
Well, we want to sort of highlight the legacy and commitment of the church to the school. Like Karen said, we both had all the kids in our family had jobs at the hospital every summer. And people prayed for us. I know people donated to our education, because when you have 5 kids, no matter what your occupation is, tuition's a lot. But especially when you're logging and you work hard hours, we just know that a lot of people helped us through.
And there was a retired community here, as Greg mentioned, right over there. And they had called the Golden Years, and each one of the retired members had a student they prayed for while they were in school. And they would send me letters when I was at PUC and say, the Cricks prayed for me, which I was so appreciative. And they'd say, we're praying for you. We know the Lord will bless you. And I always felt so loved by the fact that there was so much intentionality I felt in this church. And as you said, too, the hospital, the church, the school, it was far-reaching legacy. And we want to just share just a brief moment, just how our family was blessed by coming into the Adventist church, starting with Debbie and your kids.
Okay, we definitely took a different path once we became Adventist. And for me, I have been teaching in the Adventist system for many, many years, over 30 years.
She's an awesome teacher, Adventist.
Stop.
Reading Adventist Elementary. Awesome teacher. She's won awards. Yeah.
But then my kids went to church school, and then to Rio, and then to PUC, and then to Loma Linda. My grandchildren have gone to church school and Rio and Southern, and the legacy keeps going. Legacy keeps going.
And my children, my sister's children, my other sister's children, my brother's children have all gone to Adventist schools, and most of them are working in either Adventist school teaching, in medical. We have 2 doctors in the family that graduated from Loma Linda, all because it started here. And we have to thank my parents, because when they joined this church, this is what I've thought of so many times. There was 80 members back in 1966, and they were the only people, and Cheryl Calderero, her family too, for a while, everybody was in healthcare or in education. And when you have lumber people come in who have come from a whole different world and accept you in, it's really a blessing. And today our brother leads, he is the strategic, he's the second in command of Advent Health on the east side. And he oftentimes talks about getting a start here, that he started
in
working
grounds.
in grounds here at the hospital. And he has very much gives the message of the Sonora Adventist Church, that where he started, and he is now leading one of the largest hospital systems in the United States. So thank you to the Adventist Church.
And I just want to say this about my dad. I remember what he said, because when he came out of, when he started joining the church and asking for Sabbath off, and he went from logging to driving a lumber truck, and on Friday mornings he would get up like at 4 in the morning and do his route so he could be done by the Sabbath. And some of the other people he worked with would sort of, I don't know if it was really tease. He didn't tell me everything they said. He just said, sometimes they asked me, are you sure it's worth it? I mean, what's the big deal with going to that church and keeping Sabbath? And are you sure it's even true? And I remember he said, this is what I tell him. Even if it turns out at the end it wasn't true, the Adventist Church has changed my life. It's the best decision I've made for my family, and I'll always be grateful. So thank you, Sonora community.
I do want to say, Dad would have been shocked coming back today, because he rebelled against that stoplight going in. The day that went in, he said, this is the day Sonora starts to die. There's like 7 stoplights now. Anyway, thank you. We love Sonora Church and all these different people. Peter. So good to see you.
Wow. The last time I was up here, it was not this stage. It was the original stage, and it was 75, and I was putting the mics away and pulling up the cords. Oh, there's no cords anymore. And I was the assistant to the PA for Charles Martin. And he's the one that mentored me. And today I'm a film producer and work at a radio station. So just another thing that Sonora, experiences in Sonora, lead us on, in our whole lives. It just, it's the start. So my name is Peter Stickney. I'm the son of Leona and Ruth Stickney, and my siblings are Scott, Leonda, Melinda, and Andrea. And we came here in 1967, and we had just been to Expo 67 in Canada on a road trip, 7 of us in a little car and tent trailer. Pulled up here to the house directly behind the school where we were to live, and oh, the people are still there that were moving out. So, and we were tired of riding in this, in a car. So anyway, we stayed in the tent a couple more days. So we moved in the house, directly behind, and the playground was much smaller. There was a creek that ran all the way around in front of the church, where the church is now, and we crossed the bridge to get to school. And soon after, my father came as the principal and also taught biology, and he just kept looking at that, and this was just a decrepit playground. Some grass, but a lot of, that Sonora, red dirt. There was a lot of it. And he just kept looking at that. It's like, we got to do something. And he went to the board and said, let's do something about this. And everybody got on board. And there's a tunnel with the creek runs through. And Calvin Olson came in with his heavy equipment and covered it up and leveled everything out, and they put a sprinkler system in and put in good grass, and so that's what you get to enjoy, today. One fun story, soon after that was done, and I think the grass had pretty well filled in, and in the middle of the night, we hear this roaring, and somebody's out there doing donuts in my dad's precious yard. And he jumped in our car and chased them through town, probably honking or something. And at some point, the police got involved. And my father jumped out of the car and said, "I put you under citizen's arrest." So my father, those of you that knew my father, he was a very gentle man and very thoughtful and very gentle. But obviously, you could push a button, and he would stand up and say, "No more." So when we came here, the school was quite new, so there was just the, they had just added the 9th and 10th, what we called 9th and 10th grade, the wing on this side. And after a few years, they added the other wing for lower grades. And my father really pressed them to put restrooms in there for the young kids, and that they're appropriate for young kids. And I think that was kind of a struggle, for some people. It's like, why do you need that? Why do we need extra plumbing? And, that costs a lot more. But anyway, and the Reeves came, and so Mrs. Reeves taught there. And Greg talked about Mijanita Mucha. When she came a few years after we came, and she lived in the duplex right next to us. And she came here from the Philippines, and just this wonderful, sweet lady. And we soon adopted her as part of our family. And she taught a lot of us about her culture. And, it's been talked about how, racially undiverse the community, I don't know what it's like now, but then there wasn't a lot of diversity. And so we learned about the Filipino culture and the different cultures within the different languages within different regions. And she would go to San Francisco a lot to the Filipino church there, where she could associate with, Filipinos. Except she said that most of them, I think there was Ilocano or something anyway, it was like, they talk like chickens. So that was frustrating to her. And obviously there's, within different cultures, we have that thing where we're kind of like somebody else is different than us, and we're not really totally accepting of them. Anyway, she was, and we learned enjoyed her cooking too. And like Greg said, it was just so devastating. She was driving home from visiting friends in San Francisco, Filipino friends in San Francisco, when she was killed in a head-on car accident. And yeah, it's just, I was a little older, I wasn't in her classroom, but she was, you know, she was like a sister to me or aunt or something, but just that devastation that we all felt. And thinking now, what a devastating thing for anybody, but then for young kids to have to deal with that and process it, it was just really, really tough. And so, yeah, and let's see, what else? Oh, my father was a handyman and always loved his school and protect it, and did not want to spend money if it wasn't needed. So he would repair things himself, and if possible, and that could be, anything, plumbing, electrical, whatever. He loved the bus, and the bus to him was part of the community, and he was really adamant that the school needed that bus, and he would repair it when he could himself to help save money. We had a few trips in that bus, didn't we? Lots of Dodge Ridge ski trips, Camp Wawona for Bible camps, Santa Cruz area for biology trips, probably so many other places. And Cheryl had reminded me of, like going to Wawona and things like that, and that bus was going all over the Sierras. And some of you know of this road, Ward's Ferry. Would you drive a bus down that? My dad did, and with precision. Yeah, it's, anyway, so he was a very dedicated teacher, dedicated principal, and he would make sure that he took the time when it was PE or recess to go out and play with the kids. Basketball, whatever, baseball, he was there with he would be playing basketball with his big water keys jangling, and, but he was gonna, he just wanted to relate to the kids and get to know them, and on a more human thing and not teacher-student. Some of his kids that lived in the area here, Harrisons and Graybows and others that lived close by, and then the Banks when they moved up the hill. In those days, we'd entertained ourselves. We made up our own games. And so we made up a game called Pop-Up. And based on baseball, except no bat, but a tennis ball, and, piece of plywood, square piece of plywood, rectangle, whatever, and pitch, pop up, and then, go run. The creek, I don't know the irrigation thing here, if it's covered up mostly or if it's still exposed. But we used to, play in there, and that was a great place to hide playing ditch for the community kids. And not only the kids that, live nearby, because there was always kids visiting us or hanging out with us while their parents worked at the hospital or something. So again, it was a bigger community, church community. And then when John Moy was hired here, my father was his first boss. And John came here fresh out of the Army. And so he had some military kinds of ways of dealing with things. And I know my sister Andrea reminds every now and then of some of the tactics that, anyway, my father mentored him, and John became the wonderful teacher that he was, and administrator too. And also John and Margaret became very dear friends of our family. And in fact, they were another extended family that we've gathered over the years of, different special people. My mother was always involved in the school in one way or the other, whether she was teaching home ec or helping out with teaching home ec or typing, or sometimes helping out in the office if it was needed. And even when she was the director of food service at the hospital for many years, of course, that kind of helped access. But she was a great hostess, so when there would be events, she had great access for, for getting food at a good price. But she was well known for throwing the events and stuff and helping out with fundraisers or just gatherings. And they were both very active in the church, besides their roles at the hospital or the school. My father was an elder. My mom was super active in everything, in the choir and singing, and also sharing her insights and thoughts and guidance. And here she wasn't, but later on she was also an elder in church until some churches have issues with that. I don't know why. Ellen White was female, and anyway, sorry, I digress. I'm rambling, and it's just so wonderful to be here, and so many wonderful memories. And although I'm a city person, I thrive living in a city. This was the best place to grow up. Oh, and this emotion thing, my father was emotional, would get emotional, and he would not apologize. So I'm not apologizing. The community, the people here that I grew up with, the people that mentored me or just were around, were so, it was such a safe, grounding place, a place of love, acceptance, grace. And even with, as a young kid, and Pastor Harris's evangelistic series before he was a pastor here, and there was all these different biblical things that are scary to kids. Everybody, that was disconcerting. However, the people and the lives, the way people lived their lives, were loving and caring and grace. And I think that is one thing that just really sticks with me, is that that there was room for everyone, even to a little kid that was not always, I was struggling with, I was odd a lot of kids are odd, aren't we, growing up. But I was struggling. I was gay, and I knew it. But I was struggling with it, and of course, society and everything like that. But there was people here that showed me acceptance and grace, especially mentoring adults that just were steady mentors. And thank you so much. And
thanks.
What a joy it is to be here and hear all these stories. I wish I had heard these stories 13 years ago, right? They would have been helpful for a life of ministry here. How many of you have crawled through the tunnel that has been mentioned so many times? Go ahead and raise your hands. You've crawled through the tunnel. You skateboarded through it, okay. Well, I like to see that there's a few of us, quite a few of us, who have crawled through the tunnel. Man, I don't even know what to say. When I moved to Sonora so many years ago, I thought I knew something. When I left, I thought to myself, I knew nothing, and this community taught me everything. I learned about living together with people. I learned about needing other people to invest in my life, to invest in the lives of my children. I learned about the value that comes through living in this incredible community full of where did my ladies go? Doctors and loggers and stonemasons and just the incredible variety of people that God brought to this community to live together with all of our differences, right? I mean, we're all so weird, right? I mean, it's not just you and it's not just me. We're all so weird, every one of us. And God brings like all of these misfits together into a church where I love what Paul says in 2 Corinthians. He says, I work for your joy, and I don't lord over your faith. What an incredible way to live in a community where we work for one another's joy and we refuse to lord over one another's faith. And when we think about our beloved teacher who dies, I think of the people that I've done funerals for in this building. I think of the children, the child, I think of Barrett Graybo, who went to our school, who came to evangelistic meetings in this church, and who we buried. And I think of working for one another's joy. And I think about living together with one another in suffering and brokenness. And we work to educate our children. Sometimes we need some educating ourselves. It's a beautiful thing that God has done here. In a lot of places, I'm sure it's like this, whatever business you're in, when when teachers get together, I'm sure teachers have things they whine about. And I'm sure, if you're in the movie producing business, when movie producers get together, there are probably things they whine about. The thing that pastors love to whine about when they're together and nobody is listening is how much money schools cost. right? Because pastors are often having to lead the charge and say, yes, we have to raise the money for school subsidy, and yes, we have to raise the money to get kids into school. And when we're together, we're just like, Lord have mercy, think of what we could do if we didn't have to raise all this money for these schools. And whenever that happens, I think to myself, these pastors are insane. They don't get it. They don't get the incredible value that a well-run Christian school brings, not just to the kids, not just to the staff, but to the entire community. And I would say that's the thing that I learned. I learned that when we as a community partner together and work really hard, whether it's building an endowment like happened under Pastor McMurray's tenure, or if we're raising money for worthy student funds, or we're up on that roof with Richie Christensen in 110-degree weather trying to roof a roof when I don't have a clue what I'm doing, I'm just doing what you tell me. You know, all of that, in the end, it's all worth it, because through all of that, we build this. And, you know, there's two incredible studies that have been done by my alma mater, La Sierra University, right? The first was the Value Genesis study, and in the Value Genesis study, they discovered that you get about 30% out of your family. I'll tell you what 30% is. You get about 30% out of your church, and you get 30% out of your school. In other words, when the family is working for Jesus and loving Jesus and worshiping Jesus, and when the family is engaged in the life of the church, and when the family is engaged in the life of the school, each one of those contributes about 30%, 25-30% to your child's connection to Christ long term. And that's something that we have here that we don't have everywhere, because we have families that are nurturing one another. I mean, I have families in this church that they're like parents to my children, aunties, uncles. And families are doing their best to lead their kids to Christ, and the church doing their best, and the school doing their best. And when all three work together, the Value Genesis study says that we dramatically increase our children's long-term commitment to Christ. And when any one of those things is missing, it shifts the balance. Second thing we learn, this is a different study they did, cognitive genesis. I love this one. What is the number one reason why kids that go to Adventist schools do better than they are expected to do? You know, these educators, they have this thing, this sort of like expected achievement and then the actual achievement. And in Adventist schools, our actual achievement is well beyond our expected achievement. What is the single factor what is the single factor for the difference in expected achievement, which is here, and the actual achievement, which is here? What's the single largest factor? It's actually one factor. It is whether or not students feel loved by their teachers. I don't know how many millions of dollars this study cost La Sierra, but that is literally the secret sauce of Adventist education. When kids go to school and feel loved and welcomed by their teachers, they do better than they would if they didn't feel loved by their teachers. So, for me, this has been a place where I've learned a lot. I learned a lot what it means to live together in community. I learned a lot about the importance of Adventist education. I learned a lot about how to be a dad from the fathers in my church. And this is a place where I saw in practical ways where families and the church and the school all working together, investing in education, produces something beautiful. It produces this. As we go forward into the world, young people are facing, I think, unprecedented challenges. I think maybe this is just a sign that I'm getting older. But I don't think so. I think that in the last 10 years, the world has changed in ways that would have been hard to wrap your head around. And children are having struggles and challenges that I think it would have been hard to wrap our heads around, right? The amount of addiction that is plaguing our communities, the amount of suicide that is plaguing our communities. It's devastating. And now is not a time for us to retreat. Now is a time for us to advance. Now is a time for us to say, as a community, I'm trying my best to know my role here, right? Children need what we have. Families need what we have. And let's be clear, our church needs what we have. I want to just wrap this up with a short story. How do you like this remodel? I think it's delightful, and I have to tell you, it looks amazing on your live stream. It looks hot. Yeah, it's good. It looks great. And you know, the people that did this, the amount of sacrifice and Jim Grossman crawling underneath the concrete, drilling. He put me in there one time too, and it was fun. But it was an incredible amount of work. And it was a team effort. Jim would be the first to say it was a team effort, right? Jim would say, oh, it's a team effort. But it would have never happened if it didn't have a leader of the team, and that was Jim, right? That's just the facts, okay? Yeah. Yeah. Funny thing is, Jim was from Minnesota, and I don't know, he was sick of the cold or something, and they decided they were going to go west. And it's quite the cute story. I don't know if you've seen Jim's boom truck. Have you seen his boom truck? It's awesome. I think it had 15 different colors of body on it when they were going to move here. And Martha was like, we are not driving across the country in that truck looking the way it is. So she painted it with gray primer, house paint with a roller. I love that story. They showed up in Sonora. They were Christians, not Adventist, and they wanted a Christian school. And they landed here, made friends, joined the church, raised their kids in this community. Their kids raised their kids in this community before Jenny committed apostasy and moved away. And that's just one way. It's just one way that God has used the school to draw people to Christ, connect them to the church, generation after generation after generation. So, thanks so much, Discover Life and MLAJA, or SAS, for teaching me and teaching my kids, and for loving me and loving my kids, loving my family, and nurturing us along in this journey. God bless you.
Would you mind standing with us tonight and singing side by side? Side by side we stand, awaiting God's command, worshiping the saving King, living by His grace and moving out in faith. Jesus Himself will see us through. Jesus will come and say to
Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for your goodness, and tonight we heard so many great stories, humorous, inspirational, but it helps us see how you've led us from our humblest beginnings to our greatest successes. And we just want to continue to be everything that you want us to be as a school. So we ask that you continue to bless us and lead us in a changing world and a changing community, because we just want our students to be there for you. In your name I pray, amen.